going to talk a little bit about the vagus nerve and the technology that I've been involved with called vagal nerve blocking, or V-block, as a possible additional alternative to the obesity gap, where we need more treatments and treatments that give us dependable weight loss. Here are my disclosures. The only one of significance, is I am involved with a company called Enteromedics, which is developing the reversible laparoscopically placed vagal nerve blocker. Well, the vagus nerve actually is quite important in the roles it plays in appetite, satiety, and weight regulation. And there's been previous work by one of our colleagues that when he performed vagotomy, patients tended to lose weight, but it was not sustainable weight loss, possibly because compensatory mechanisms come into play. So the V-block device is it's a permanent, or can be permanent, reversible, programmable vagal nerve blocker that shuts off sometime during the day to allow the vagus nerve to recover and hopefully prevent these compensatory mechanisms from coming into play. There's research, both clinical and animal work, to demonstrate that it actually has a role, and it's still under development, and I'd like to go over it with you now. You'll also hear the term neuromodulation when this is discussed, because the vagal blocking device is one form of neuromodulation, which is basically using an electrical pulse generator to either stimulate or to block normal physiologic responses. The target could be a nerve, like the vagus nerve. The target could be the adrenal glands, the stomach, the colon, the small bowel. What the device doesn't do is it doesn't pace the organs the way a pacemaker paces the heart. So this just demonstrates that you can do neurostimulation or neuroblocking with a pacemaker-like device. And when you do neurostimulation, what you're doing is targeting the nerve or targeting the organ and sending electrical currents in both directions of communication. And it's usually done with a very low amplitude frequency. When you do neural blocking, you're actually stopping communication in both directions. Communication's coming in, communication's going out, and it's usually with a high frequency stimulation. Well, the vagus nerve, let's get back to it. It's the 10th cranial nerve. It's the longest nerve in the body. And unlike most of the cranial nerves, it's not one of two pairs. It's actually one nerve that breaks down into two trunks, and the trunks innervate the GI tract. And what does it do? Well, interestingly, only 10 to 20% of the vagus nerve actually sends signals to the organs from the brain, usually to regulate pancreatic enzyme output, gastric emptying. 80% of the nerve sends impulses up to the brain, basically telling the brain what's going on in the GI tract vis-a-vis, is there food in it or is it empty? Does the person need to eat or need to not eat? And the literature of the vagus nerve goes back to John Crowell with the open vagotomies, but even some of these papers like this was actually an incidental finding where they were placing vagal nerve stimuli into patients with epilepsy and found out that those at higher output lost weight. And the higher the output, the more the weight loss. It's very possible at high output they were actually blocking the vagus nerve, not stimulating it, but it was able to demonstrate that if you apply electrical current to the vagus nerve, you can potentially get weight loss. Well, the V-block device is basically placed laparoscopically, takes 45 minutes to an hour, and what you do is you free up the two trunks of the vagus nerve at the gastroesophageal junction. You place the electrodes on it. A couple of stitches later, you're done. It's a same-day surgery procedure, and basically it results in early satiety. Patients who have the device tell us they're less hungry and they eat less. It was approved by the FDA a couple years ago, and this little study demonstrates that it actually reduces the input of all three fats, proteins, and carbohydrates equally, meaning patients can still eat what they want to eat, they eat less of it. And one of the things that I think is most favorable about this technology is it allows patients to eat the diets they want to eat, their traditional, their religious, their cultural diets, where most bariatric surgery, we're telling patients you can't eat this, you can't eat that, watch if you eat that, you're going to get into trouble. So what this does is just seem to reduce normal eating by about 30%, and that study from Australia demonstrated that, where if you look at the red, the green, and the yellow, they're reduced about equal amounts each. Well, this device has been studied now since around 2000, and now it's over 700 patients have been implanted worldwide. There have been a number of proof of concept and feasibility trials, and then a couple of large prospective, multi-center, sham-controlled trials, and blinded, by the way. And I'm not going to talk about the Empower trial. That trial did not show good results, but it was followed up by the Recharge trial, which improved upon the limitations of the first trial. And I just want to share a little bit of the results with you, because the Recharge trial is what the FDA used to approve this device. This was the first bariatric surgical device approved by the FDA since the lap band. This was a multi-center randomized double-blind sham-controlled, not placebo-controlled trial with a 2-to-1 randomization, and it was double-blinded. So how did we blind patients having an operation versus patients not having an operation? Those in the control group got laparoscopic skin incisions, but they didn't get the device implanted. So when they woke up, they looked and they felt like they had a laparoscopy, but they didn't. A dummy device was placed under the skin that behaved, was charged, and interrogated exactly like an active device. So when the patient came to the office, they didn't know whether the device they had was real or not. And we found by doing questionnaires after the study, most patients had no idea what they had. And this is the data. At 12 months, which was the primary endpoint, there was statistically significantly better weight loss in the study group than in the sham group. However, we did not reach a 10% super superiority, which was the promise that we had made to the FDA, meaning that the difference had to be greater than 10%, and we were 8.5%. And then after we looked at some post hoc analysis, it seemed that the reason we fell short was that we were able to pre-study, predict accurately what the device was going to do. We didn't expect that the sham patients were going to lose as much weight as they did, about 18%. We expected 5% based on previous work. However, if you look at the study here, as you go beyond 12 months to 24 months, the weight loss in the active group remains stable. The sham group starts to demonstrate itself as a control group, and more patients started to fail. And the difference at 24 months was highly statistically significant and greater than 17% between the two. We also could demonstrate an incredible safety margin. The complication rate was about 3.7%. There were no major complications. There were no deaths. Most of the complications were heartburn or pain at the neuroregulator site. Most of them were deemed mild to moderate, and most of them got better with their own just a little bit of time. Now, when we also looked at metabolic studies, we looked at patients that were pre-diabetic, and we could demonstrate with this that if you were normal at baseline, the likelihood of becoming diabetic was only 22%. And if you were pre-diabetic at baseline, 50% of those patients reverted to normal. So it dramatically improved sugar control. If you look at metabolic syndrome, the same thing. If you had metabolic syndrome at baseline, and you had the device, 53% of those with metabolic syndrome at 12 months no longer had metabolic syndrome. We also looked at a responder analysis, and I just want to point out one thing for the sake of time. If you ask what was the likelihood of a patient losing greater than 50% of their excess weight, it was 13 times more likely to be a patient in the active group than in the sham group. We also looked at a subset of diabetics and demonstrated that we can reduce the hemoglobin A1C by over 0.5%. And we also could demonstrate that we can dramatically reduce the likelihood of requiring diabetic medications. Now, you heard a little bit earlier about durability. This is durability out. We now have data out to 4 years with essentially the same plot. And this is the 3 trials, all out to 24 and 36 months. And as you can see, the weight loss was durable. Question, how does it work? Well, physiologically, it causes satiety. Physiologically, we know what the vagus nerve does, but no one's ever put the 2 and 2 together to say this is how it works. This was a very interesting animal study by people totally unrelated to the V-block research. And what they did was they looked for the mechanism of action. And I want to show you what they were able to identify. First of all, it seems that the V-block device, vagal nerve blocking, has absolutely no effect on gut hormones, no effect on gastrin, on glucagon, GLP-1, PYY, CCK. All of those levels were not changed in an animal model with or without vagal nerve blocking. However, there seems to be a lot of activity going on in the brain with the increase in hypothalamic messenger RNA expression, brainstem messenger RNA expression, and in the hippocampus messenger RNA expression. So clearly the vagus nerve input into body weight, satiety, and weight regulation seems to be related to activity deep within the brain. Another question that comes up is, how do we apply it? Is it going to be good for some patients and not others? Is it going to be more efficacious to put the electrodes higher up on the vagus, lower down on the vagus? How do you set the device? What voltage? What current? What pulse frequency? What total energy delivered? All of that's going to have to be worked out for us to get the most out of this device. And I personally think that as good as our results are now, we could probably double those results by getting a better set of parameters for setting the device. And also, we need markers to know if we're efficacious. If we make a setting of the device, which we can do in the office, how do we know the new settings are better than the old settings? We need markers, whether it's hormones, whether it's a cardiogram, something. So in conclusion, the preliminary studies have suggested that the reversible, programmable vagal nerve blocking device, which is placed laparoscopically, seems to achieve durable weight loss and meaningful weight loss in the improvements in the comorbid conditions. I think it can be considered an option. It is in the United States at this moment, but I think we got a little bit more to learn about it before we'll see its true potential. Thank you very much.